Sometimes, the smallest wish can move the biggest hearts. In a quiet corner of Dorset, where winters have forgotten how to snow, one boy makes a final wish to build a snowman of his own. What follows isn't magic, but something rarer, a community that decides to make the impossible happen. This is a story about courage, love, and the kind of kindness that still takes your breath away. A story that reminds us that miracles don't always fall from the sky sometimes. They're made by hand, in the dark, by people who simply choose to care. Settle in, turn the volume up, and let the snow fall. You're listening to The Last Snowman, written by Barrel Coops. Chapter 1. The Measure of a Beginning. The midwife said the boy arrived sounding like a farm whistle, sharp enough to set the rooks circling out of the beech trees and bold enough to make the kettle tremble on the Rayburn. Brenda laughed through tears, the kind that come as a second tide once the first has gone out, and John stood beside the bed with his hands open at his sides, as if ready to catch the whole world if it decided to fall. They had already learned, with their first child, that the room after birth slows time into syrup. Voices grow hushed, light turns kind, and you can hear the minute hand on the kitchen clock through 2 doors and a hallway. The boy had a good weight to him and a chest that announced his presence without apology. "Hector," John said, once the noise softened and the midwife had gone to fetch tea. "Hector, for courage." He tried the sound on his tongue the way farmers test a soil crumble, rubbing it for promise. Brenda rolled the name between breath and smiled and said yes, that it fit, that it made sense the way some names do when you see the face they belong to. The farm, 108 acres, all told, stitched together like different cloths in a well-worn quilt, sat in verdant fields outside the village. From the lane, the house-place seemed modest, a low stone farmhouse with a roof that sagged at the eaves like a tired shoulder, a kitchen garden half-tamed, a scatter of barns whose doors rarely latched the same way twice, but stood in the yard you could feel the sweep of land behind it, the long breadth of the barley ground curving away towards the stream, the square of beans that always looked sulky early on and then surprised everyone in August, the orchard that still remembered the hands of the man who'd grafted it 50 years before. In winter, the hedges went thin at the waist and let the wind gossip through. In summer, the hawthorn filled out, and the lanes took on that sweet, dusty green smell of warm leaves and tractor diesel. Samantha, who was just 6 when Hector arrived and 14 by the time this story opens, moved through the place with the quiet competence of someone who had long ago mapped its quirks. She knew which flagstone by the back door rocked if you stepped on it too far to the left, and which hen, an old red mongrel with ambitions beyond her station, would always try to nick cat biscuits if you turned your head. She knew her father's patience could stretch to mending a fence 3 times but would snap at the sound of a dripping tap, and that her mother could coax life back into any plant if you gave her a month in a patch of sunlight. In the mornings, before school, she would slip on her boots, tug a jumper over her pajama top, and go out to rattle feed into the troughs while the sky practiced becoming day. If Hector was awake early, he would come with her, hair standing up in points, voice too big for his smallness, and he would tell her the first line of whatever story he'd made up in the night. Hector collected first lines, the way other boys collected trading cards. On a shelf above his bed, he kept a row of notebooks, cheap, spiral-bound, the cardboard covers softened at the corners by being thumbed too often. He titled them with a seriousness that made Brenda bite the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. Book of Questions, Volume 1. What makes things what they are? Things I know that might not be true but could be. He read everything you put near him and a fair bit you didn't, and then he read the backs of cereal boxes and the instructions for wall plugs and the warranty for a toaster that had gone to scrap long before he was born. He was not big and not small, not loud all the time, but never very quiet. And while the boys in his year measured themselves by studs in their boots and the angles of their hair, Hector measured himself against puzzles he set and solved for the joy of it. The house kitchen, with its warm tiles and paint that always needed one more coat, held them like a hand. On cold mornings, the Rayburn breathed heat into the backs of legs. On wet afternoons, a small procession of socks, mittens, and the occasional hen feather hung by the range, drying into order. The table had a wobbly leg that John kept promising to fix and never did because it seemed part of their geography. You learned to seat your tea at the quadrant that didn't wobble and to keep your elbows off when the custard was runny. Friends came through the back door with the brief shake of rain from shoulders and the apology for not knocking that no one required. The dog, old Tilly, whose sight had narrowed to a useful blur, made it her daily work to herd sunshine patches across the floor. It is the habit of ordinary days to go about their business without announcing themselves as precious. Perhaps that is their greatness. It meant that no one noticed the first stumble any more than they noticed the slight change in the way Hector held a pencil, the grip creeping higher so that his letters leaned towards each other as if they needed a conversation. He tripped on the yard steps once and skinned a knee. It made a good story over tea about how the hen, offended by his noise, had clucked him into better manners. He blinked hard in the late afternoon of a school day and said the board looked fuzzy, and Brenda tucked it away on the list beside school shoes and the wonky cupboard door. He put a hand out for the banister on the stairs more often. He was still quick with answers on quiz night, still fast enough to beat Samantha down the lane if she gave him a head start, still cheerfully loud when the kettle boiled, yet something about the shape of his tiredness changed, like a shadow at a new hour. When the school sent home a note after PE, Hector seemed unsteady during running drills, perhaps a check with the optician. Brenda booked an eye test for the following week and kissed the soft hair at the back of his head when he leaned across to look at the appointment card. The optician found nothing to scold, no crossed signals from eye to brain, and suggested they ask the GP to take a look for peace of mind. Peace of mind is a phrase that carries its own opposite in its pocket. John drove them to the surgery in the farm van because the car had started doing a small but worrying cough, and the van, though prone to lurching like an old horse on ruts, had never once failed to start. The GP was kind in the way of someone who has seen fathers sit with their hands open at their sides and mothers say they're fine while their eyes argue with their mouths. He checked reflexes, asked about headaches, made Hector follow the end of a pen with his eyes, and then said that, to be thorough, he would like them to go up to the hospital for a scan. None of them said the word dread aloud, because a word like that is superstitious. You fear that naming it will teach it the path to your house. They went up to the hospital on a Friday with rain on the windscreen like a beaded curtain. A volunteer in a blue cardigan handed Hector a leaflet with a cartoon MRI machine on it and told him it was noisy, like a jackhammer at a party. He liked the idea of a machine that made pictures out of magnets and time. He liked even more that Samantha, who had wrangled permission to skip the last period of school, sat beside him and asked if he wanted her to come in or to wait. He chose both till they told her she could not, and then wait within seeing distance of the door. In the evening, back at the farmhouse, Brenda made eggs on toast because eggs on toast are what you make when you need both hands free for touching the people you love as they pass you plates. John answered the phone with his surname, as he always did, and then with his first name, as he did when unsure the line was clear. He wrote down a time from Monday on the back of an envelope that already carried a price for seed and the words, "Call Mike re-gate" in his caps. He toweled his hands and did not look at the others until he had finished the whole of the glass of water he hadn't noticed he was holding. He said the appointment was with a specialist. He said it as if that could be neutral. "Does a specialist mean I'm special?" Hector asked, with a smile tilted into mischief because he could not bear a room to be too serious for too long. "It means they like questions," Samantha said, rescuing the ball and throwing it back with spin. She nudged his shoulder with her own, casual and deliberate. "You're good at those." On Saturday, The farm reminded them of its indifference to human calendars. The beans needed checking for rot after a week of damp. The tractor wanted a new belt. A ewe had got herself stuck on the wrong side of a gate and bleated like a scolded aunt until Brenda came down the lane, with her soft voice that even sheep obey. Hector joined John in the shed and learned the names of 3 tools whose functions he already understood. Names matter, John said, because a thing well named is a thing you can ask for help with. They worked until Hector's grip loosened, and John pretended the job was done anyway, because a boy must be allowed to stop because he wants to, not because he can't. That evening, with the light going quick at the edges as November does, the 4 of them sat at the kitchen table with mugs steaming and the dog's head heavy on Brenda's slipper. They did not speak about Monday. They spoke instead about first snows. Samantha remembered a year when she was small enough to think snow fell only in their lane, because nowhere else could possibly be so important to the clouds. Brenda said once, as a girl, she had pressed a penny into a fresh drift and come back the next morning to find the imprint perfect and glittering, a coin made of frost. John told a story about a night on a hilltop with friends when they were 17 and stupid, the moon out big as a plate, the snowfields shining so hard you felt you might fall into the light. Hector closed his eyes and tried, as he always did, to catch and keep the first line. On Sunday, he drew a snowman on the little calendar pinned to the corkboard by the back door on the square for January, just above the words in Brenda's hand that said school starts. 2 round bodies, a smaller third for the head, stick arms lifted in hello, a carrot that looked more like a wedge of cake because he could not be bothered to sharpen the orange pencil. You only ever helped, he told the snowman, to be clear about the boundary between past and want. This time you're mine. Brenda kissed the top of his head without remark. John moved the wobbly-legged chair a fraction to the left, so the calendar fell in Hector's daily path. Samantha pulled a mitten from a drawer and put it beside the pencil pot like a talisman. Hector, who could never leave well enough alone, added a hat to the snowman and then a scarf and then a second scarf, in case the first was not warm enough. He wrote, small and neat, along the bottom edge of the square. January will try its best. Monday came on quietly padded feet, the way hard days often do. The hospital corridor smelled of lemon polish and the faint chemical tang that always haunted the air by radiology. The specialist had kind eyes that did not flinch. There are rooms designed to bear bad news and rooms that pretend to be other things. This one had a window with a view of a tree that could be any tree in any season, and 4 chairs that invited people to sit in ways that made them forgive the chairs for being in such a place. When the doctor spoke, he used sentences that were whole and did not hide in their own pockets. He talked about pictures and places in the brain where you cannot put a knife. He talked about clever people doing brave work in research that would not be ready in time for a boy who was 8 now. He talked about radiotherapy as a way to comfort rather than cure. He mentioned months, and the number he said could fit, if you pushed, between one winter and the next. Brenda counted her husband's breaths for a while because it gave her hands work to do. Samantha counted the tiles along the skirting board because numbers make patterns that hold. Hector listened with the grave attention he gave to the first chapter of any book. He asked if it was okay to still do PE until he felt wobbly, and the specialist said yes, so long as wobble won. He asked if the machine that made pictures would work again if he needed it to, and the specialist said, of course, like a promise. And then, when the edges of the grown-up's words had softened into the ordinary kindnesses people use for exiting a room, Hector asked the question that would define the shape of his year. He asked if it would snow. The specialist did not laugh and did not lie. He said Dorset had its ways and weather did not read appointments, but he knew that sometimes people made weather of their own. Hector nodded, as if that matched what he already suspected, and slid his small hand into Samantha's. I want to build one, he said, looking at the space just over the doctor's shoulder where he could imagine a field. Properly, not just the head. Back home, the kitchen took them in with its familiar untidiness, and the dog, who knew what rooms of this magnitude required, put her muzzle on Hector's knee and stayed there like ballast. John found the envelope with seed prices and wrote Tuesday 8 a.m. call radiotherapy along the margin where he could not miss it. Brenda filled the kettle and set out 4 mugs, and though no one needed tea, they all accepted it, because ceremony matters when the ground shifts. Samantha stood at the patio doors and looked out at the fields, imagining them white and quiet under a sky that had chosen to say yes. Hector came to stand beside her and rested his forehead on the glass, damp breath making a small oval that blurred the hedgerow beyond. "January," he said, and he did not say, "We'll see," or "maybe," or "if we're lucky." He said it like a plan he'd already begun. Later, after the others had drifted into the tasks you perform when you cannot fix the thing that needs fixing, Hector took a fresh notebook from the shelf and wrote, on the first page in tidy print, "What I want." He did not list toys or trips or big, shiny promises. He wrote, "Make a snowman," and then, after a pause, "Teach someone else how." He closed the book and put it under his pillow as if the wanting of a thing could warm it into being. Samantha watched him, the way sisters do without seeming to, and tucked away in her own mind a resolve that felt like a knot tied tight in a good rope. Weather might not read appointments, but people did. And if January would not come to them, she thought, then perhaps there was a way to borrow a piece of it and bring it home. Chapter 2. The Word No One Wants. By the second morning, the news had settled into the air like a smell that couldn't be scrubbed out. It followed them through rooms, mild and relentless, clinging to curtains and clothes. Even when no one spoke about it, it was there between the clicks of the Rayburn, in the sound of boots scraping mud at the back door. In the small pauses when someone said, "Tea?" but really meant what now? Brenda had hardly slept. When she closed her eyes, she saw the consultant's mouth moving, the careful hands on the desk, the softest tone she'd ever heard a stranger use. That gentleness had terrified her. It meant they all knew. She woke before dawn, the sheet cold beside her where John had gone out already to feed the animals. She stayed still, staring at the shadow of the wardrobe, feeling the weight of the word the doctor had used, tumor. It had shape now, weight, geography. She hated that she knew where it sat, deep in the middle of her boy's head, unreachable, unfixable, already stealing small things like his balance and the steadiness in his voice. Downstairs, the kitchen light threw a soft square on the flagstones. John was sitting at the table with his mug untouched, the steam gone to ghost. His elbows were on his knees, the cap of his thermos loose in one hand. He looked like a man who had been trying not to think and had failed. When Brenda came down, he started to speak, then stopped, then managed. "I didn't know how to tell the men at the mill." They asked after him. She nodded. There was nothing sensible to say. They made breakfast because that was what mornings demanded. Bread, butter, tea, simple gestures that had always worked before, though this time the comfort slid off like rain on wax. Hector came down yawning, hair sticking up, still the same in all the ways that mattered. He asked for honey on toast and talked about a book he wanted to read. The world tilted between ordinary and unbearable. Samantha stayed quiet through the meal. She watched her brother trace a face into the condensation on his juice glass, watched her mother laugh too quickly at one of his small jokes, watched her father's hands, those steady, soil-worn hands, tremble just enough that he put them in his lap. After breakfast, when Hector went to look for the dog, Brenda leaned against the counter, gripping the edge with both hands. "We have to tell people," she said. "Not yet," John answered. "Just not yet." He wasn't wrong. The first few days are private. Grief in its first skin is thin and shy. It doesn't want visitors. That afternoon, Brenda went to the washing line and hung things that didn't need drying. The movement steadied her. The wind moved through the sheets, snapping them like sails, and she stared at the sky until her eyes stung. Somewhere in her mind, she replayed the doctor's voice. "We'll do what we can to keep him comfortable." The phrase circled like a slow tide. Comfortable. Not better. Never better again. John took refuge in work. He fixed a hinge on the barn door that hadn't troubled anyone in years. He split logs until his shoulders burned, then stacked them with the precision of a man who needed the world to obey him in some small way. Every evening he checked on Hector's homework, even though none of it mattered anymore, and he hated that thought the uselessness of normality. Samantha cried only once in front of anyone. It was the night Hector fell asleep on the sofa with his head in her lap, the dog curled at his feet. The fire was low, her parents whispering in the kitchen, and she felt the quiet truth settle over her like a weight she could never put down. The tears came without sound, falling into her brother's hair. When Brenda walked in, Samantha wiped her face quickly, pretending she'd just been yawning. Brenda didn't challenge the lie. She sat beside them, took Hector's hand, and smoothed his hair, all three of them pretending that the silence was peace, not fear. The house became divided into small, private rituals. Brenda cried in the pantry, where the smell of apples covered the noise. John walked the long boundary hedge at dusk, always alone, always coming back with his eyes red from wind. Samantha stayed up late, scrolling through winter weather forecasts on her phone, as though knowing the odds of snow could change something. On Thursday, Hector asked if he was going to die. He said it matter-of-factly, while coloring a picture of a robin from an old Christmas card. Brenda had been folding washing at the table. For a heartbeat, she froze. The air seemed to shrink around her. "Yes, love," she said finally, voice barely holding. "But not today." He considered that, pencil hovering. "Then I've got time," he said, and went back to shading the robin's breast. She managed to stay upright until he left the room, then folded into the chair, pressing her palms to her face. When John came in later, he found the drawing pinned to the corkboard beside the snowman sketch. The robin was bright, the snowman crooked, both impossibly alive. He stood looking at them a long time before turning out the light. That night, the wind picked up from the west, carrying the scent of rain and sea. It drummed against the windows and slipped under the eaves. Hector slept easily, dreaming of snow. Brenda lay awake beside him, listening to the rhythm of his breath, counting each one as if she could keep them from running out. Samantha dreamed of fields turned white, of her brother laughing under a sky that finally kept its promise. And John, in the dark of the kitchen, sat by the cold Rayburn, with a cup gone cold in his hand, whispering words that had no audience and no answer. He'd always thought grief arrived after loss. He learned that week it sometimes came early, setting up camp in the hallway while life was still inside the house. Chapter 3. The Bravest Face. By Christmas, the news had thinned into something the houses could almost fold away. Almost. It sat in corners and cupboards, behind every small joy, never gone, only quieter for a while. The farm wore its usual December skin mud frozen in the gateways, the hedges bald and brown, the air thick with chimney smoke, but inside the house, Brenda insisted on tinsel, as if glitter could hold the dark back. Hector helped her untangle the lights, patient with the knots, his tongue poking out as he worked. "You'd think they'd know how to behave after last year," he said, and when she laughed, it was half real. He wound the colored bulbs around the banister, pausing to admire his reflection in the baubles. You wouldn't have known, seeing him, how sick he was. His face was still open and bright, though his steps had grown smaller and slower, and sometimes he leaned his weight against the rail when he thought no one was watching. John fetched down the box of decorations from the loft, coughing in the dust. He held up the wooden angel Samantha had made in reception class. The paint faded to a sort of gentle beige. "Still fit for service," he said. Hector grinned and hung it right at the front of the tree. They didn't speak about hospitals or treatments that week. They spoke instead about mince pies and how Santa must be getting on for a pension. Hector wrote his Christmas list on a scrap of paper and left it on the mantelpiece. It had 3 things. 1. For Mom and Dad not to worry. 2, 3. For Sam to stop pretending she's fine when she isn't. 4, 5. For snow. 6. The first 2, Brenda read later when tidying the hearth, broke her heart cleanly in 2. The third she folded into her purse, a small prayer she could carry. On Christmas morning, Hector was up first, padding barefoot to the living room, the dog trotting at his heel. The rain had been at the windows all night, soft but relentless, the sound of a sky that couldn't make up its mind. He pulled back the curtain and looked out, hopeful for a moment, then smiled to himself as if forgiving the world for getting it wrong again. "Maybe next year," he murmured, and turned back to the tree. The days slipped past with the strange elasticity of time in grief. Each one looked like the one before, yet the weeks added up without warning. January came, gray and wet, the fields running with standing water, the air smelling faintly of rot and diesel. The doctor came and went, gentle and cautious, always with the same calm tone that said nothing new but managed to fill a room with compassion. Through it all, Hector seemed the steadiest of them. He smiled when Brenda's voice broke, steadied her hand when she spilled a cup, and told John off for glaring at the clouds like they owe you something. He still read voraciously myths, science, encyclopedias, anything that explained how things worked. He said he liked to know what was happening behind the curtain. At school, the teachers kept things normal. His classmates took their cue from him. When he joked, they laughed. When he tired, they fell quiet. He was small, now, in a way that wasn't just height but a kind of translucence. Yet he had that spark, the one that made people want to be good around him. Samantha tried to keep pace with him, pretending optimism she no longer felt. She hated that he was the one cheering them on. She hated how easily he forgave the world for being cruel, and still, she couldn't bear to let him see her break. At night, she sat with her laptop open, the blue light washing her face, scrolling through long-range forecasts. She read terms she didn't understand, jet streams, polar vortexes, La Niña shifts, but the message was always the same: mild, wet, unseasonably warm. Every site she checked said Dorset would see rain and more rain, and maybe frost by February, nothing more. When she muttered this to Roger over lunch one day, he frowned and said, "We'll find something. There has to be something." By February, the mud outside had become part of their daily lives. The lane was a series of puddles that mirrored a sky the color of dull tin. On the news, a weatherman in a blue suit declared that the country was seeing the effects of another mild winter. His tone was cheerful, as though he were discussing a good harvest. Samantha switched off the television. Hector's hair had started to thin. He made a joke of it, less to wash, less to comb. But Brenda still cried when she changed his pillowcase and saw the faint dusting left behind. John tried to keep busy, though the farm jobs seemed to multiply without progress. He'd find himself standing in the barn with a spanner in his hand, unsure what he'd meant to fix. The only constant was Hector's smile. It wasn't the forced kind adults use to reassure each other. It was the calm, luminous acceptance of a boy who had made peace with something larger than he could name. When neighbors visited, bringing casseroles or fruitcake, he asked about their dogs, their children, their work. "I'm all right," he told them, and somehow they believed him. On a Sunday in mid-February, the family took a drive into the hills. The air was bright but brittle, a teasing promise of winter that never came. From the high road, they could see the faint shimmer of frost on distant roofs. Nothing more. Hector pressed his nose to the glass, eyes wide. "It looks like it tried," he said softly, and then changed its mind. Brenda reached back from the passenger seat and squeezed his hand. That night, after Hector was asleep, John stood at the patio doors, looking out over the garden. The grass gleamed darkly under the porch light. Brenda joined him, resting her head against his shoulder. "He's braver than either of us," she whispered. John nodded, swallowing hard. "He shouldn't have to be." Upstairs, Samantha sat at her desk, Roger on a video call. They'd spent the evening combing weather data again. Long-range forecasts, polar drift models, a scatter of graphs colored in anxious blues. "Nothing till late summer," Roger said finally, voice low. "Scotland might get some, high up. But down here, not a chance." Samantha looked over her shoulder at the window. Rain again, drumming soft and steady. "Then we'll just have to make it snow," she said. And though she had no idea how, the words felt right the moment she spoke them. Outside, the garden lay dark and glistening. Somewhere, in the room below, Hector stirred in his sleep and smiled, as if he'd heard her promise through the walls. Chapter 4. Failures That Teach You the Edges. By March, the days had grown a little longer, though it was hard to tell from the mud. The land around the house farm still glistened dark and heavy, the hedges brittle from months of rain. The calendar said spring, but the air felt like February holding on. The first daffodils came up along the lane, pale and trembling, as if embarrassed to be early. Hector, now 8.5, had become the most cheerful person in the household. He tired more easily, sometimes losing his balance, sometimes slurring his words when he was worn out, but he joked about it with a grace that made everyone else ache. "My brain's just running too many tabs," he'd say, tapping his temple. "Need to close a few windows." Brenda cooked more than anyone could eat, filling the freezer with soups and stews as if she could feed away the sickness. John busied himself fixing gates that weren't broken and tuning the tractor for the 3rd time that month. He'd sit with Hector for hours, reading adventure stories or old manuals, anything to keep his hands from shaking. The house lived in that strange balance between pretending and knowing. Samantha, meanwhile, had stopped pretending. She had found her anchor, make it snow. It began one cold Saturday morning in Roger's garage, the kind of space that smelt of oil and sawdust and quiet ambition. They stood over a collection of parts, rescued from the local tip, a pressure washer, a box fan, lengths of pipe, and something Roger insisted would become a nozzle once he'd worked out the physics. "I read that you just need water and cold air," he said, his hair sticking up in all directions. "How hard can it be?" Samantha gave a thin laugh. Famous last words. They worked all morning, tinkering, testing, spluttering. The contraption, once assembled, looked like a piece of plumbing having an identity crisis. When they turned it on, the thing coughed out a spatter of icy drizzle that coated the driveway in a glistening sludge. For about 30 seconds, it looked promising until the fan seized, and the pump spat a final sigh of warm water. Roger kicked the side of it gently. "We made wet snow?" "More like watery optimism," Samantha said. They both laughed, though the sound had an edge. Over the next weeks, they tried everything YouTube had to offer. Mixing compressed air with garden hoses, experimenting with freezer coils, even buying a cheap, instant snow powder that promised magic and delivered a sticky mess that smelled faintly of glue. Each attempt ended the same way in puddles and frustration. Still, they kept trying. After school, Samantha would tell Brenda she was revising at Roger's. Brenda never questioned it. She was simply glad her daughter was out of the house and not brooding in silence. The adults didn't know that in Roger's garage, 2 teenagers were plotting how to outsmart the laws of nature. One evening, Roger found Samantha sitting on the cold floor beside their latest failure, staring at the heap of soggy slush. "He's not going to get his snow, is he?" she whispered. He sat down next to her. "Not yet, but we're not done." She turned to look at him, eyes rimmed red. "You always say that." "Because I mean it." He hesitated. "You know, we could ask for help. Someone must know how to do this properly." She shook her head. "Mom and Dad wouldn't understand. They barely go near a computer. And I can't tell Hector. He'd think it's a waste of time." Roger frowned, thinking, "Then we go around them." That night, he showed her how to set up a crowdfunding page. He picked the words carefully, typing in the glow of the screen. "A boy named Hector has never built a snowman. We want to give him one last winter before the world gets too warm." Samantha added a photo. A small, blurred shot of Hector in his wool hat, laughing at the camera. Not a trace of illness showing. They posted it under Roger's account. No surnames, no exact address. Just a story, a simple wish. The first donations trickled in by morning. £5, £10, a few messages from strangers. "Bless you for trying. Hope you make it happen." Then, astonishingly, an anonymous £1,000 appeared. Samantha stared at the number, her mouth open. "Someone's actually reading this," she said. Roger grinned. "Told you. The internet's not all cat videos." For the first time in months, Samantha felt something close to hope. But by the end of March, reality returned with its usual indifference. Flights to Lapland were impossible, too expensive, too risky, and no insurer would cover a terminally ill child. Every travel agent she called grew polite the moment she mentioned medical condition. Some offered to send brochures, most just murmured sympathy and hung up quickly. April arrived soft and green. The blossom came and went without snow, without even frost. He didn't complain, not once. When Samantha brought home weather charts, he listened, nodding seriously. "Maybe the world's saving it up," he said one afternoon, gazing out across the wet fields. "Maybe there's a bit of snow somewhere that's got my name on it, and it's just running late." Samantha forced a smile. "Then we'll have to make sure it knows where to find you." Later that week, she and Roger sat beneath the big oak behind the school field, scrolling through long-range predictions. Roger sighed. "You're not going to like this." He turned the screen toward her, a national forecast map glowing in deep red and orange tones. Above average temperatures expected through August. She laughed softly. Not because it was funny, but because crying again would make it too real. "End of summer," she said, reading the small print. "They're saying it won't snow anywhere in the south before next year." Roger closed the laptop. "Then we'll think bigger." "Bigger? Yeah," he said, half smiling. "If the mountain won't come to Hector," Samantha finished for him, eyes bright despite herself, "we'll bring the mountain to him." The wind moved through the budding trees, shaking loose the first hints of green. Somewhere far off, a wood pigeon called, slow and steady. Neither of them knew how they'd do it, only that they would. Because when the world refuses to give you winter, sometimes you have to build it yourself. Chapter 5. The Longest Summer. By the time May settled in, even the mud had given up pretending to be winter. The barley swayed in soft green waves, the hedges thickened, and the swallows returned to the old beams of the tractor shed. Dorset shimmered with heat by day and smelled of warm dust by evening. It was the kind of summer that made most people happy, but for the House family, the sun felt cruel, almost mocking. The crowdfunding page had slowed to a trickle. The anonymous donor's generous £1,000 still sat there, joined by a handful of smaller gifts, well wishes, and short messages that made Samantha's heart swell and sink in the same beat. But none of it mattered anymore. They'd reached a wall. No flight companies would touch the idea, no charities could move fast enough, and the warmth came early, spreading north long before June. Roger's makeshift snow machine lay dismantled in the corner of his father's garage. The pipes and hoses, once full of promise, were stacked neatly beside a box of bolts. Every so often, Samantha came by, stared at the mess of metal, and left without a word. Hector grew thinner as the world grew louder. The fields filled with birdsong, the air buzzed with bees, and the sound of lawnmowers rolled through the lanes like an anthem to normal life. Yet inside the farmhouse, time seemed to move differently. Brenda still cooked enough for 6, but half the plates went cold before anyone remembered to eat. John found work in every corner of the farm, fixing a fence that had already been fixed, greasing hinges that barely squeaked, repairing a tractor that didn't need it. He was rarely idle, but never busy enough to forget. Samantha and Roger stopped talking about snow. Their messages drifted to homework, then films, then silence. Hope had become a tender thing, one touch too rough and it would bruise. Hector, meanwhile, never asked again. He still smiled, still found things to wonder about. One day, in June, when the sky had been cloudless for a week, he asked Brenda why people wished on falling stars, but not on raindrops. "Maybe because one's rare and the other's everywhere," she said. He thought about it for a long time before replying. "Then I'd rather wish on rain. You get more chances that way." By July, his energy came and went in small bursts. Some mornings he'd be out helping John feed the hens, walking with his slow, uneven stride. Other days, he'd stay in bed, book propped open, reading until his eyes drifted closed. His voice stayed bright, though, when he was awake. "I'm not going anywhere till I see winter," he told Brenda one afternoon. She kissed his forehead, nodding like she believed it. Summer pushed on, golden and unrelenting. Roger went on holiday with his parents for a week in August, and Samantha stayed home, helping her mother with the house. She found herself resenting the warmth the way it filled every room, pressing against her skin, making the world feel indifferent. She watched neighbors picnic in the meadows, children running with kites, and felt a bitterness she hated herself for. Once, she caught herself staring at Hector through the open patio doors as he sat sketching at the kitchen table. The sunlight turned his thinning hair into a pale halo, his pencil moving slow but sure. He was drawing snowflakes, hundreds of them, each different, each labeled with little notes like "too small, needs colder air, won't last." Samantha stepped outside before he could look up. By September, the days had grown shorter, the evenings cooler. The swallows were gathering in the telephone wires, restless for their journey south. The farm smelled of cut hay and wood smoke, that early whisper of another season, but still no snow, not even frost. The doctors had stopped pretending the numbers could be predicted. Brenda avoided asking for updates. She could read her son's strength better than any chart. Hector's skin had gone pale as milk, and he moved like someone wading through thick air. Yet he never complained. If anything, he seemed more concerned for everyone else. When the evenings turned chill, Brenda caught him one night at the patio doors, staring out toward the fields. "What are you looking at, love?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Just imagining them white." She pressed a hand to her mouth and turned away so he wouldn't see her cry. The next day, Samantha and Roger met at the cafe in town, the same one where they'd made their very first snow plans half a year earlier. The window was steamed, the smell of coffee thick in the air, and neither of them spoke for a while. "Feels like we failed him," Samantha said finally, stirring her drink, though she didn't take a sip. Roger shook his head. "We just ran out of weather." She managed a weak smile. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No," he said softly, "but it's true." They walked home along the lane as the light began to fade, both lost in their own thoughts. The conversation dwindled into the sound of gravel underfoot. At the gate to the farm, Samantha stopped. "We should tell your dad to shut down the page," she said. "It's been sitting there for months doing nothing." Roger nodded. "Yeah, I can post something tonight." But he didn't do it right away. He told himself he would tomorrow, or the next day. Life had a way of dulling even the sharpest resolutions. And so the page stayed up, half forgotten. By the end of the month, the air smelled faintly of rain again, that soft, familiar dampness that always came before autumn. Hector was spending more time indoors, often curled up in the old armchair by the patio doors, sketchbook balanced on his knees, looking out at the fields. He said it was the best seat in the world because you could watch 2 seasons arguing and never have to take sides. One night, near the end of September, Roger couldn't sleep. He wandered downstairs, opened his laptop, and clicked onto the old crowdfunding link out of habit, a relic more than anything. The page loaded slowly, the progress bar creeping like a reluctant snail. When it finally opened, he blinked, sat forward, and frowned. There, time-stamped weeks earlier, were 3 new messages. He stared at them for a long time, hardly daring to breathe. Then he reached for his phone. "Samantha," he whispered when she answered, groggy and half asleep. "You need to come over, now." Chapter 6. The Door That Opens When You Knock Long Enough. Samantha's phone started buzzing just after 6 on a Sunday morning, that gray hour when even the birds hesitate. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. It stopped, then buzzed again, short and insistent. She groaned, groping under her pillow, and squinted at the screen. Roger calling, she frowned. Roger never called this early, not unless something was wrong. "Roger? What? Sam," he cut in, his voice too awake, too sharp. "You need to come over, now." Her stomach tightened. "Is it Hector? Did something happen?" No, it's not that. Just, please, come. I'll explain when you get here." "Roger, it's—" But he'd already hung up. She lay there for a moment, the phone still warm in her hand, blinking at the ceiling. Outside, a thin line of dawn had begun to lift the dark from the hedgerows. Somewhere down the lane, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Her first thought was annoyance because teenagers are still teenagers, even when the world's falling apart. He was probably showing her another daft idea, another way to make snow out of ice cubes and wishful thinking. Maybe he'd found a new gadget online. The thought gave her a bitter laugh. "What now?" she muttered into the pillow. "What possibly now?" Still, she couldn't shake the unease in his voice. Downstairs, the kitchen felt too large, too quiet. She made tea, spooned in too much sugar, and stood by the back door staring out at the garden. The fields were heavy with mist. The world washed pale. The old scarecrow at the edge of the barley looked half ghostly in the haze. Brenda padded in, wearing John's cardigan, her hair a soft tumble around her face. "You're up early," she said, rubbing her eyes. "Roger called," Samantha answered. "He said to come over." Her mother frowned. "Everything all right?" "I think so," he didn't say. Brenda nodded slowly. "You'll tell me if it's about Hector?" "Of course." Samantha managed a small smile, then slipped on her trainers. Outside, the lane still held the cool of night. She walked fast, breath misting, hands jammed into her pockets. The hedgerows smelled of damp earth and elder leaves. She passed the cottage with the slate roof where the woman always fed stray cats, the old bus shelter with its half-fallen poster about recycling, all the small markers of ordinary life that somehow felt unreal this morning. Halfway to Roger's house, she slowed down. The light had thickened, soft gold touching the tops of the trees. The world looked almost new, the kind of morning that asks nothing and promises little. She checked her phone again. No new messages. Just that short call, 5 minutes long. He could have just told me what it was, she thought. Whatever it is can't be that important. She turned the last corner and saw Roger waiting at his gate, hands shoved into his hoodie pocket, his hair sticking up like he'd been awake all night. The moment he saw her, he straightened. "Took you long enough," he said, trying for a grin but not quite making it. "It's 6:30 in the morning," she replied. "You're lucky I came at all. What's this about?" "Inside. Just come and look." The way he said it made her pulse jump. She followed him into the kitchen, still smelling faintly of toast and machine oil. His laptop sat open on the table, screen glowing in the half-light. He didn't speak, just pointed. The crowdfunding page she'd almost forgotten about was there, the one with the photograph of Hector in his wool hat and the story they'd written half a year ago. For months, it had been quiet, dead space on the internet. Now, at the top of the comment thread, 3 new messages were marked in bold. Samantha leaned closer, reading slowly, her breath catching. The first, from a man named Peter, said simply, "If you can find a way to do this, I'll fund it. I own a transport company. I'll make it happen." The second, from Patrick, manager of a ski resort in the Highlands. "We've 2 mobile snowblowers retired but working that you can have. They're due to be scrapped, but they still make proper snow. Only problem is, they're up here, you're down there." And the third, from 3 names listed together, Hugo, Jacko, and George, read, "We work maintenance at the same resort. We'll bring the snowblowers ourselves if we can get them moved south. Just say when." Samantha's mouth went dry. She looked up at Roger. "Is this—" He nodded, eyes shining. "Real. All posted within a week of each other, while we weren't even looking." She sank into a chair, staring at the screen as if it might vanish if she blinked. "They want to help," she whispered. "They can help," he corrected softly, "if we can get it all to work." For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the fridge and the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then Samantha gave a long, shaky breath, the kind that comes after months of holding one in. "What if it's too late?" she said quietly. Roger sat beside her. "Then we'll make sure it's not." The laptop screen flickered, the early light glancing off the glass. Outside, the world was waking, birdsong swelling, the smell of morning stretching through the open window. It was as though the year itself had paused, waiting for their next move. Samantha reached for the mouse, her hand trembling slightly, and scrolled down to the reply box. "Let's tell them yes," she said. Roger nodded. "All of them?" "All of them." She smiled for the first time in months, not the careful smile she used around her parents, not the tired one she gave the neighbors, but something alive and bright and trembling with possibility. "Let's bring Hector his snow." Chapter 7. Hope with its sleeves rolled up. By mid-morning, the fog had burned off, and sunlight fell across Roger's kitchen table where the laptop still sat open. Neither of them had moved far since dawn. The screen glowed like a doorway, the kind you half expect to close if you look away. Samantha traced her finger under the first message again, lips moving silently as she read. "If you can find a way to do this, I'll fund it." She'd read it a dozen times already, but the words hadn't yet found their place in her mind. Roger pushed a mug of tea toward her. "We should check if it's real," he said, "before we get carried away." "Yeah," she murmured, though her voice trembled. He opened a new tab, searching for the ski resort's name, Glengie Highlands Resort, and there it was, a real website, photos of slopes, chairlifts, snowcats. The contact page listed a number. Samantha took a breath. "I'll call." Roger grinned nervously. "Go on then. You've got the grown-up voice." She rolled her eyes, but her hand shook as she tapped the number. The line clicked, a few rings, then a Scottish accent, warm and brisk. "Patrick Fraser speaking. Hello, hi, Mr. Fraser. My name's Samantha House. I'm calling about a message you might have sent on a crowdfunding page for a boy named Hector." A pause, then the man's tone softened. "Ah, I remember. Wee lad in Dorset wants to build a snowman. That was me. Still stands. Lass, I meant every word. Those old snowblowers are just taking up space. You're welcome to them if you can fetch 'em." Samantha's hand flew to her mouth. "It's real," she mouthed to Roger, who was pacing in small circles. "Into the phone," she said. "Thank you. You've no idea." Patrick chuckled gently. "I think I do. We heard about him in the staff canteen. Good lad, from what I read. We'd like to see that smile again. I'll let the engineers know you've called Hugo, Jacko, and George. They'll help load the gear if you can get transport. Thank you, she said again, and meant it in ways words couldn't hold. When the call ended, Roger let out a breath that came out as a laugh. So it's all real. It's all real. She could hardly believe how the sentence felt in her mouth. They messaged Peter next, the haulier who'd offered to fund and move the equipment. He replied within an hour, "Glad you're in touch. I can have a truck at Glenshee by Tuesday. Don't worry about cost, I'll cover it. I've got a depot outside Blandford where we can store everything until you're ready. Keep me updated. Peter R." Roger stared at the message, whistling low. That's fast. Efficient people scare me, Samantha said, half laughing through nerves. What if we actually pull this off? Then we'll have to tell your parents, he said quietly. The words landed like a stone. For a long moment, Samantha didn't answer. She just stared out the kitchen window, watching a line of crows lift off from a telegraph wire and settle again, like indecision in flight. She'd spent months keeping this secret, protecting her parents from disappointment. Now she'd have to risk breaking their hearts with hope. That afternoon, they walked the lane back to the farm together. The air had that early autumn clarity, crisp and almost sweet. The fields were turning gold at the edges. The tractor sat idle near the barn, engine still warm from John's morning work. Through the kitchen window, they saw Brenda standing at the sink, sleeves rolled up, her hair coming loose. John was at the table, marking something on a folded sheet. Feed costs, maybe, or a note for the vet. Domestic normality, fragile and complete. Roger hesitated. Are you sure you don't want to ease them into it? No, Samantha said. It's all or nothing now. They stepped inside. The dog trotted over, tail thumping against a cupboard. John looked up first. Well, this is a surprise. Shouldn't you two be in school? It's Sunday, Dad. Is it? Feels like Tuesday. He rubbed a hand across his brow, smiling tiredly. What's all this about then? Samantha took a breath. We've been keeping something from you. Brenda's hand stilled on the dishcloth. It's nothing bad, Samantha added quickly. Just something we were trying to do for Hector. We wanted to make it snow for him. I know it sounds silly, but John opened his mouth, probably to interrupt, but Roger jumped in, words tumbling. We made a crowdfunding page months ago to try and get him to Lapland, but flights were impossible. We were going to shut it down. Only last night people messaged. Real people. A ski resort in Scotland offered us 2 snowblowers, engineers to run them, and a haulier Peter. He's sending a truck up this week to collect everything. He'll store it till we need it. It's happening. Silence filled the room. Brenda turned slowly from the sink, her eyes wide and wet. You what? Samantha swallowed hard. It's real, Mum. We've spoken to them all. They want to help. They can make snow anywhere, they said. If there's enough water, we have the lake. It could work. For a heartbeat, Brenda just stared. Then she covered her mouth with both hands, shoulders shaking. Oh, love, she whispered, half laughing, half crying. John pushed back his chair and stood, his face unreadable. He looked from Samantha to Roger, then to his wife. You did all this without telling us? Samantha nodded, braced for anger. He was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, Good. Her eyes lifted. Good? He nodded again, voice rough. Good. Because I think we'd have told you it was impossible. He reached for Brenda, resting a hand on her shoulder. And I'm tired of impossible. Brenda turned, wiping her cheeks, a watery smile breaking through. When? Soon, Samantha said. If we start now, before the cold goes completely. John gave a small laugh, part wonder, part disbelief. Well, we'd better not waste any more daylight. That night, after dinner, Samantha sat with Hector in the living room. He was curled up in his favorite chair by the patio doors, sketchbook open, a blanket around his legs. Outside, the fields lay soft in the half-light. "What are you drawing?" she asked. He turned the page toward her. A snowman. Again, but this one had a background: fences, trees, the faint outline of the farmhouse behind him. "I'm getting better," he said. "He looks like he belongs here now." She smiled, brushing his hair from his eyes. "He does." As he bent back to his drawing, she looked out at the fading sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. For the first time in a long while, she felt the faint hum of hope, not as a cruel tease, but as something real, something breathing beside her. Chapter 8. The Gathering of Winter. Peter's transport office sat on the edge of the industrial estate just outside Blandford, a squat brick building that smelled faintly of diesel and coffee, with a forecourt full of parked lorries that gleamed in the pale afternoon light. Inside, everything was efficient without being cold. Polished floors, framed photos of trucks on mountain roads, a kettle that never seemed to cool. When Samantha, Roger, and her parents arrived, Peter met them at the door, hand outstretched, smile easy. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, in his mid-50s, with a voice that sounded like gravel warmed by sunlight. "You must be the Houses," he said. "And this must be Roger, the lad with more determination than sense." Roger flushed, grinning. "That's probably accurate." Peter waved them inside. "Come through. Let's talk about how to borrow winter." The small conference room was bright and spare, a whiteboard on one wall, a stack of mugs on a side table, and a map of Britain pinned above the radiator. Samantha couldn't help glancing at the red pins marking the company's routes, tiny arteries of movement stretching from Scotland to the south coast. "First off," Peter said, settling into his chair, "I've got a truck on the way north. It'll reach Glenshee by tomorrow evening. My driver, Alan, will stay overnight. Load the snowblowers first thing Wednesday and head back down Thursday. They'll be in Dorset by Friday evening." John blinked. "That quick?" Peter shrugged modestly. "We move livestock faster. These things don't wriggle." They laughed, and the tension broke. "I've also arranged for a storage spot here at the depot," he went on. "We'll keep the snowblowers and generators safe until we move them to your farm. Speaking of which, I've already sourced a generator from one of our suppliers. Big old diesel unit, runs smooth. I'll cover the fuel." Brenda put a hand to her mouth. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything," Peter said. "But I've made a start. Had a word with the local fire brigade this morning, unofficially, mind. My brother-in-law's a watch commander at Station 12. I told him the basics. He reckons if you've got a lake on your land, they can rig a pump feed. They'll need clearance, but he'll lean on a few doors. They like helping with good causes." Roger exchanged a look with Samantha, a spark of disbelief. "This is really happening," she murmured. Peter nodded firmly. "It's happening because people want it to. Good news travels fast when there's a kid involved who still believes in snow." John leaned forward. "What do you need from us?" "For now, just space, water, and a bit of patience. I'd say we reconvene in a week next Wednesday. The machines will be here. The engineers will be driving down from Glenshee, and the fire brigade will confirm their part. That gives us a few days to pull the plan tight before the big day." Brenda exhaled slowly, smiling through tears. "His birthday's Saturday." Peter nodded. "Then Saturday it is." The collection, 2 mornings later, under a low Scottish sky. The transport lorry rolled into the Glenshee yard. Mist hugged the slopes, and the snow guns sat waiting long, metal throats with fins and nozzles, ghostly relics of winters past. Patrick Fraser, the resort manager, stood with his 3 engineers, mugs of tea steaming in their hands. Alan, Peter's driver, climbed down from the cab. "You must be Patrick." "That's me," Patrick said, shaking his hand. "Right then, these are the beauties you're after. Still work fine, we just upgraded. Shame to see them go to scrap." The engineers, Hugo, Jacko, and George, helped him load the machines. Each was a little battered, but clean, oiled, and tested the night before. Patrick clapped Alan on the shoulder when the last ratchet strap was tightened. "You tell that wee lad from Dorset we're rooting for him. Haven't had a proper white winter ourselves in years." Alan nodded, touched. "I'll make sure he knows." The journey south took the better part of 2 days, the lorry humming through half the country with its strange, precious cargo. Back in Dorset, Peter met the fire chief over coffee at a small cafe near the station. The chief, a broad man named Martin with weathered hands, listened quietly as Peter explained the plan. "Snow machines, you say?" Martin rubbed his chin. "And they need water from a lake?" "Plenty of it. The boys' family have one right behind their house. It's clean water farm runoff, mostly. We just need one of your tender trucks to pump it. You'd be doing a good thing, Martin." The chief smiled faintly. "You always did know how to rope us in, Pete." He looked out the window for a moment, thoughtful. "All right, I'll get clearance. Off duty, of course. Volunteer basis. I'll bring 3 of the crew. We'll run a hose line from the lake to wherever you set the guns. Make sure the pressure's steady." Peter leaned back, grinning. "Knew I could count on you. Just make sure there's tea," Martin said, standing to shake his hand. "And bacon rolls. Firefighters run on bacon." "Done." The planning meeting. A week later, on a soft October afternoon, the conference room at Peter's office was full. Patrick joined by video call from Scotland, a snowy mountain mural behind him that made everyone smile. Around the table sat Samantha, Roger, John, and Brenda, the 3 engineers, freshly arrived after a long drive, and Martin with 2 members of the fire brigade. Peter stood at the head of the table, a sheaf of notes in hand. "All right, everyone. We're here because one small lad's dream is about to come true. Let's make sure we do it right." He nodded to Hugo, the eldest engineer, who opened a worn notebook and began to explain how the snowblowers worked. "They need power and water, that's all. We'll test the air nozzles first, but I've checked every valve. We'll start low pressure, adjust the mix till we get snow that sticks. Too fine, and it'll melt. Too wet, and you'll get slush." Martin took notes. "We can feed constant pressure from the lake. You just tell us your rate, we'll match it." Brenda looked between them, amazed. "You all make it sound so simple." George, the youngest engineer, smiled. "It's just science with manners, ma'am." Peter stepped back in. "Right. Timetable. Friday morning, trucks to the farm at 8 sharp, fire brigade arrives at 9. We'll set up by the lake, run hoses, test the blowers. We'll use Friday to lay the base it needs compacting so it'll hold through Saturday. Saturday morning, we top it up. The family'll be gone till early afternoon. When they come back." He paused, smiling at Samantha. "We give them winter." The room went quiet for a beat. John cleared his throat. "And you're all sure this will work?" Patrick's voice crackled from the speaker. "You'll have snow, Mr. House. Enough to make every snowman in Dorset jealous." Laughter broke the silence. Plans followed, lists of cables, fuel drums, tarps, and hot food for volunteers. The logistics took shape like a map unfolding. Where to park the trucks, how to hide the machinery, where to position the snow so Hector would see it through the patio doors for days after the birthday surprise was over and everyone had gone home. By the time they finished, dusk was pressing against the windows. Everyone stood, stretching, hands shaking hands. Peter lingered a moment, watching Samantha and Roger at the far end of the room, heads bent over their notes. Brenda was speaking quietly to Martin, offering to cook breakfast rolls for the crew. John stood by the window, silent, eyes distant. Outside, a faint mist had begun to rise off the fields, catching the light from the car park lamps. It looked, just for a second, like snow. Peter smiled to himself. 4 days, he murmured. Just 4 days. Chapter 9. Borrowing Winter. By Thursday evening, The secret had grown so large it seemed to hum in the walls. Everyone involved knew the rule not a word to Hector. The whole village, it seemed, was in on the silence. Brenda had told him he'd be spending his birthday weekend with his grandmother in Yeovil. "She wants to spoil you," she'd said, smiling through the effort of it. "And I want her to," he'd grinned, pleased at the thought of 2 days of pudding and board games. John drove him over on Friday morning, the back seat piled with gifts and the woolen blanket he liked best. Hector waved from the gate, hair shining pale in the low sun. "Don't eat all the cake without me," he'd called, and John had promised nothing at all. The moment the car disappeared down the lane, the farm changed. The quiet broke open into movement, the low rumble of engines, the first truck arriving with its heavy load, the air full of diesel and purpose. Peter's voice carried across the yard. "Right, lads, gently with those ramps." The lorry reversed into place beside the barn, its brakes sighing. 2 gleaming snowblowers rolled down, flanked by the engineers like proud mechanics. Hugo wiped a smear of oil from his hand. His face split in a grin. "Haven't seen them shine this good in years," he said. By 9, the fire brigade truck pulled in, red paint glinting, hoses coiled like sleeping snakes. Martin jumped down, followed by 2 crew members, Sam and Ellis, all in overalls and easy smiles. And then the woman with the camera arrived. She stepped out of a small van bearing the logo of the regional news station. Her name was Claire Jennings, and she introduced herself with the brisk politeness of someone used to being everywhere and in the way at once. "I won't talk to the family," she promised, shaking Brenda's hand. "Only the people making this possible. The focus should stay where it belongs." Her eyes were kind, and there was something genuine in the way she said it that eased Brenda's worry. "You can film what you need," Brenda said, "just not when my son's here." "Of course," Claire replied. "I'd like to show how everyone's coming together. The good kind of news for once." She set up quietly, camera on a tripod near the fence line, drone packed neatly beside her boots. When she filmed, it was without fuss, short interviews with Peter, with Martin, with the engineers working in the background. Every word came out humble. No one wanted praise. They spoke of Hector like he was everyone's boy. "I just thought," Peter said at one point, staring toward the empty field, "if we can't give him years, we can at least give him a memory that feels like forever." Claire didn't reply, she only nodded and kept the camera steady. By dusk, the first hoses were laid from the lake, glinting silver in the half-light. The fire crew ran the pumps, the engineers tuned the blowers, and at exactly 7 o'clock, the first burst of snow shot into the air, a wild, white spray that sparkled against the dark. Everyone cheered, breath fogging. The sound was deeper than anyone expected, a low, steady roar that filled the field. Snow fell thick and slow, the way it does in dreams. Within an hour, the stubble was gone under a white sheet. Claire's drone rose quietly, its lights blinking, and from above she caught it all. The trucks, the arcs of water mist, the silhouettes of people laughing softly as they worked, and the field turning white in the lamplight. From up there, it looked like a miracle unfolding in miniature. Inside the farmhouse, the kitchen became a refuge. The baker, Mr. Elwood, arrived after closing his shop, still in his apron, carrying boxes that smelled of cinnamon and yeast. "Cakes first," he said, because nobody plans properly when they're hungry. He'd made Hector's birthday cake himself, a snowman, of course, simple and perfect, with sugared icing that shimmered faintly. He wouldn't take a penny. "Tell him it's from everyone," he said. An hour later, the food van pulled in Frankie's Buns and Dogs, the same one that parked by the market every Saturday. Frankie herself hopped down, lighting a cigarette and looking around the glowing field. "Blimey," she said. "Never thought I'd be catering a blizzard in Dorset." Peter laughed. "Keep the tea flowing and you'll be a hero." Already am, she said, winking, and set about feeding the crowd. Through the night, the snow deepened. The engineers worked in shifts, the fire crew swapping hoses and checking pumps, the drone humming quietly above them from time to time. Claire filmed everything, hands tightening bolts, steam rising from mugs, the strange beauty of effort in the cold. At one point, she lowered the camera and stood beside Martin, watching the snow fall through the work lights. "It's something, isn't it?" she said. He nodded. "It's everything. If we doing..." By dawn, the field lay blanketed a foot deep, the surface glinting faintly pink in the first light. The blowers were shut down, and the silence that followed was almost holy. Claire turned slowly in a circle, the camera still running, and whispered, "2 teenagers made this happen." Saturday morning brought frost in the hedges, the first natural cold in weeks, as if the weather itself had joined in. The final touches were done before breakfast. The engineers tuned the mix again, layering a fresh coat until the snow gleamed smooth and solid. Then everything was hidden. The snowblowers were rolled behind the far barn and covered with tarps. The hoses were coiled back toward the lake. The trucks were parked out of sight in the next field. Only the snow remained wide and perfect and waiting. Claire filmed the last shots from above. A white field surrounded by green, the farmhouse small and still at its edge, the morning light turning the snow gold at the rim. It looked unreal, like a dream someone had dared to hold steady. By midday, everyone had gathered near the back gate. Engineers, fire crew, baker, volunteers, and the small news team. They spoke quietly, voices soft with tiredness and something gentler than pride. Peter clapped Martin on the shoulder. "Not bad for a night's work. Not bad at all," the fire chief said. "We'll keep the pumps ready if you need a top-up." Brenda stood nearby, her hands clasped. "He'll be home in a few hours," she said. "He'll see it right through the patio doors after everyone has gone. He will be able to relive it for days." Samantha nodded, her throat tight. "That's the plan." Claire looked at her for a long moment. "You know," she said, "when this airs, it'll show people what's still possible. Not the machines or the snow, just people choosing to care." Samantha smiled faintly. "As long as Hector sees it first, that's all that matters." Behind them, the field shone under the sun, holding its cold like a promise. And in the distance, on a quiet road leading home from Yeovil, a small car carried a boy who still believed that maybe, just maybe, this would be the winter that finally kept its word. Chapter 10. The Field of Snow. The road home from Yeovil was quiet, the low autumn sun throwing golden bands through the hedgerows. Hector sat in the back seat, head leaning against the glass, his wool hat pulled low. He was pale, tired from the excitement of staying with his grandmother, but still full of talk, the sort of talk that spilled out of him when he felt safe. "They've got a robin's nest in the hedge by the kitchen window," he said. 4 chicks. I watched them all morning. You can hear their tiny throats." John smiled into the rearview mirror. "You'll have to show me next time we visit." Hector nodded, eyes bright. "Gran says she wants to come back with us for cake. She made one too, just in case." John's throat tightened. "She's following us in her car. You'll see her soon enough." The lane to the farm curved between tall banks of hawthorn. The car's tires hissed softly over the gravel. Hector leaned forward between the seats as the farmhouse came into view. And then he saw it. At first, his mind refused to make sense of it, the field, white from hedge to hedge, the sun glittering on the surface like a sea of diamonds. He blinked, then gasped, the sound small and sharp, the kind that catches in the chest. "Dad," he breathed. "Dad, stop the car." John slowed, heart hammering. "It's snow," Hector whispered, voice trembling. "It's snow." He was out of the seatbelt before the car had fully stopped, boots hitting the track, breath coming in clouds. John shouted his name but didn't stop him. He couldn't. The boy ran stumbling, laughing, crying straight toward the field. Brenda was already there, standing at the gate, hands clasped, eyes shining. "He'll be home in a few hours," she had said only that morning. "He'll see it right through the patio doors after everyone has gone. He will be able to relive it for days." Now, seeing him racing down the track, she couldn't hold herself still. She ran to meet him halfway, tears streaming as he flung himself into her arms. "Mom," he gasped. "It's snow. Real snow." She nodded, laughing through tears. "It is, sweetheart. All yours." He pulled back, breathless, looking past her toward the field, then at Samantha, who stood a few paces away, frozen between pride and fear. "Did you do this?" he asked softly. She swallowed, eyes wet. "Not just me." Roger helped. "And a few friends." Hector turned to see them, people stepping out from behind barns and hedges, hesitant at first, then smiling. The engineers in their overalls, the firemen wiping their eyes, Peter standing tall beside his lorry, Claire with her camera lowered, the baker with flowers still on his sleeves. Even Frankie, from the food van, waved a hand, her apron flapping in the wind. "Happy birthday, lad," Peter called. Hector looked around, wide-eyed, overwhelmed. You all did this for me?" Brenda nodded, her voice breaking. "Every one of them." He took a step into the snow, then another, boots sinking with a satisfying crunch. The sound drew a laugh from him, pure, unguarded joy. He turned back toward the track where his grandmother had just arrived, standing beside her car, hands to her face. The sight of the white field hit her like a memory. She began to cry, soft and helpless, shaking her head in disbelief. Hector waved both arms. "Gran, come and see, come on!" The crowd parted as she walked forward, tears running freely. "Oh, my love," she said, voice trembling. "Look at it all! Look at what they've done!" Hector crouched, scooped up a handful, and gasped as it bit cold into his palm. "It's perfect," he said. Samantha came beside him. "Need help with the first one?" He nodded. Together they began to roll a ball, small at first, then larger, the snow packing neatly under their hands. People stood watching, silent, the kind of silence that holds its breath. They rolled another, and another. The snowman rose, sturdy and round, a carrot nose supplied by Frankie from her van, 2 buttons from Brenda's coat for eyes, and an old scarf John found in the car. When it was done, Hector stepped back, face flushed, eyes shining. "He's perfect," he whispered. "He's mine." No one moved for a long moment. Claire lifted her camera slowly, capturing the stillness a boy and his snowman framed against the pale sky. The farmhouse behind, the field glowing white. She lowered it again, blinking back tears. Then Hector laughed, that bright, bubbling sound that filled the cold air and broke whatever spell held them still. "Well," he shouted, "what are you all waiting for? There's enough for everyone." It was all the permission they needed. The first snowball flew from somewhere near the food van. It hit Martin, the fire chief, squarely on the shoulder. He turned, mock outrage on his face, and launched one back. Within seconds, chaos bloomed laughter, shouting, snow flying in all directions. The engineers joined in. Frankie abandoned her tongs to lob handfuls at Peter, and even Brenda threw one at John before doubling over laughing. Samantha and Hector ducked behind their snowman, both breathless. "You realize," she said, "you started a war." Hector grinned. "Best war ever." They were still laughing when his 4 closest friends arrived. Julie, Tammy, Sam, and Simon wide-eyed at the sight before them. Julie stopped short. How is there snow?" Hector spread his arms. "Birthday magic?" The girls screamed and ran forward, throwing themselves into the drifts, scooping up snow and shrieking with delight. Someone began a second snowman beside Hector's, then a third. Within minutes, the field filled with them, tall, small, leaning, proud, 100 white figures catching the sunlight. Claire sent her drone up for one last shot. From above, the scene looked like something out of a dream, a patch of winter carved into green country, children running, laughter rising like music. Down below, Hector and Samantha stood arm in arm, gazing at the snowman they'd built. His cheeks were pink, his eyes full of light. "Best birthday ever," he said softly. Samantha smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "You earned it." Brenda watched from the edge of the field, hands clasped, tears running freely now. She didn't try to hide them. Around her, others had stopped throwing snowballs, standing quietly as they watched Hector small, fragile, but more alive than he'd been in months. Peter cleared his throat, pretending to adjust his cap. "Well," he said gruffly. "That'll do, won't it?" Martin nodded. "Aye, that'll more than do." For a long while, nobody spoke again. They just watched a boy and his snowman, standing in a field of borrowed winter, the air full of laughter and the kind of silence that only happiness can make. As the sun slipped lower, the snow glittered gold, and the first breath of evening drifted across the land. Somewhere beyond the farmhouse, the sound of a kettle starting up carried faintly through the open air. Ordinary, homely, the heartbeat of life going on. And in the middle of it all, Hector smiled. That wide, pure smile that seemed to light everything from the inside, and for everyone watching, it felt, for that one moment, as though time itself had stopped just to see it. Epilogue. The days after. The snow stayed longer than anyone expected. 4 days after Hector's birthday, the white field still shone beneath a sky the color of pewter. The air was cold and still, as if the land itself refused to move on. Inside the farmhouse, the world had gone very quiet. Hector sat in his favorite chair by the patio doors, wrapped in his blanket, a mug of cocoa cooling beside him. Beyond the glass, the snowmen stood like sentinels, their round faces soft in the gray light. Some had begun to lean, their edges melting into one another, but from where he sat they still looked perfect. Brenda moved about the kitchen in silence, folding tea towels that didn't need folding. John sat at the table, newspaper unread, the pages open to nothing in particular. Samantha stood by the window, arms folded, watching her brother. He hadn't said much that morning. His voice was softer now, breath shorter, but his eyes were bright. "They're still here," he murmured after a while, nodding toward the snowmen. "They'll be here as long as they can," Samantha said gently. He smiled faintly. "That's long enough." For a moment, no one spoke. Then he looked up at his sister. "You made it snow," he whispered. "You and Roger." Samantha knelt beside him, taking his hand. "We had help, I know," he said. "But you started it." He turned his gaze back to the field, to the snowmen standing in their quiet ranks, to the footprints frozen in the surface where laughter had lived. His eyes softened, heavy with the kind of peace only children seem to understand. "Best birthday ever," he said again, barely above a breath. And then, after a long silence, "Mom?" Brenda crossed the room and knelt beside him. "Thank you," he whispered, and his hand found hers. The kettle clicked off. Outside, a crow passed overhead, its shadow gliding across the snow. And just like that, as gently as a sigh, he was gone. They buried him a week later, on a hill overlooking the farm. The day was cold and windless. The snow had begun to retreat from the fields, leaving small, white patches in the hollows where it clung like memory. The people who had made the miracle stood together, heads bowed. Peter, Martin, the engineers, the baker, Frankie, even Claire, who filmed nothing that day. They said little. There wasn't much that needed saying. After the service, Samantha walked back down the lane alone. The air was damp, soft with the smell of thaw. She reached the farmhouse and stopped by the patio doors. Most of the snowmen were gone now, reduced to uneven mounds, buttons and scarves scattered in the grass. Only one still stood Hector's. The carrot nose had fallen. The scarf had slipped, but somehow the shape endured, stubborn and kind. She stepped outside, boots sinking into the half-melted snow, and touched the snowman's side. It was cold, rough with refrozen crust. Beneath her hand, a single tear landed and disappeared. "I'll make it snow again next year," she whispered. Behind her, the patio door opened. Brenda came out, eyes red, holding 2 mugs. She handed one to Samantha. Together they stood, watching the last of the snow melt into the soil, the white giving itself back to the earth. Out on the road, Peter's lorry passed, horn sounding once low, respectful, a promise kept. In the following weeks, the story spread quietly. Claire's piece aired late one evening, after the headlines. It showed no tears, no drama, only faces. People working, smiling, helping. Her voiceover said very little. It didn't need to. The final shot was the drone footage. The white field in Dorset, dotted with snowmen, a boy waving from the center. No names, no plea for sympathy. Just a story about what people can do when they choose kindness. Letters came from across the country. Small parcels, cards, photos from children who'd gone out the next morning to build their own snowmen in his name. They called them Hectors. And when the next winter came, thin and late, a few flakes drifted down over the farm one morning in December. Brenda stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching them fall. For a moment, she thought she could see him, a small figure at the edge of the field, head thrown back, laughing at the sky. The snow melted by noon, but the warmth it left never did, because somewhere between grief and grace, they had borrowed winter and given a boy everything he'd wished for. You have been listening to The Last Snowman, written by Barrel Coops.
Thank you for listening to my short story, The Last Snowman, a story about love that outlives loss and the kindness that still exists in the quiet corners of this world. If this story touched you, please take a moment to let others know. Leave a like, share it with someone who needs reminding that small acts still matter, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Please leave a comment below. Whether you loved it or hated it, this all helps me in my creative endeavors. Every listen, every comment, every kind word helps these stories find new hearts to land in. And if you're still here, sitting in that silence after the last line, hold on to it for a moment. Because somewhere, in every winter that follows, a boy named Hector still stands, smiling beside his snowman. Until next time, thank you for listening. Don't forget to tap the bell, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe for more stories from Barrel Coops.